Madam Speaker, I move that the Honorable Maximo Rodriguez Jr. of Party List Abante Mindanao be recognized for a matter of personal and collective privilege.
What is the pleasure of the Honorable Rodriguez Jr.?
It's about the proposed importation of fish due to the banning of fishing grounds, which might displace 1.8 million of fishermen in the country.
The Honorable Rodriguez has 10 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, and to my fellow congressmen, I bid you all a pleasant good afternoon. I rise before you today on a matter of personal and collective privilege on the issue on the fish importation in the country by the Department of Agriculture and more particularly the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. As many of us know, we live in a country with over 2.2 million square kilometers of highly productive seas with rich aquatic and marine resources for our utilization and consumption. And for that reason, Filipinos largely depend on fish as one of the main sources of protein, and more than that, where more than 1.8 million marginalized fishermen depend for their livelihood. Mr. Speaker, in 2011, despite the fisheries subsector's weakened performance, the Philippines still rank as the top 8 fish-producing country in the world, from being at the top 12 in the year 2000. Records reveal that the fisheries production averaged at 2.7 metric tons from 1985 to 2000. In 2009, we have surpassed the 5 million metric ton benchmark in fisheries production. The fishing industry has become one of the top growth drivers of the agriculture sector, contributing to at least 5% of the agriculture sector's contribution to the gross national product. Owing to the alleged weakened performance of the fishery subsector in 2011, which accounted for 20.7% of the total agricultural output, the Department of Agriculture plans to impose wider limits on fish catches up to 2 years' time. The plan would then force the government to allow more imports to meet the demand. Verily, the purpose of such plan is to replenish the fish stocks in a period of 2 years' time and for the purpose of protecting our food security. It is alleged, Mr. Speaker, that the Philippines' major fishing grounds have shown signs of overfishing and water pollution, and that the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources proposes to impose a ban on 10 out of 13 major fishing grounds. The question is, what is BFAR doing to rehabilitate these fishing grounds? Mr. Speaker, the move of the BFAR for the importation of fish and aquatic resources is neither a viable nor a sustainable solution due to the following implications. Number one, the imminent danger of extinction of the local fishing industry, the 1.8 million subsistence farmers that will be subjected to unfair competition brought about by cheaper fish imports as compared to the higher price of local fish and other aquatic products in our local markets. Number two, a more liberalized policy on importation would also impose additional pressures on fish stocks and possibly encourage destructive and hazardous practices as subsistence fishermen would be forced to compete with foreign importers to survive. Number three, fish importation would further create a gap in social inequality, as most of our Filipino subsistence fish farmers and fish workers would be displaced, caused by the lack of employment opportunities, increasing vulnerability to food insecurity and poverty. Number 4, importation does not mean that the marginalized sectors of our society, the fish farmers, would be able to access cheap imported fish. Neither would it secure them any employment to feed their families. Aside from unfair competition, one point to be taken is that foreign fishing industries are heavily subsidized by their governments. World Bank reveals that subsidies on foreign fishing industries accounted from US dollar 14 billion to $20.5 billion in 1998. Mr. Speaker, our government barely provides subsidy to our local fish farmers and fish workers. With the aforementioned premises, it is my recommendation that the government and the concerned agencies take the following measures to immediately direct the DABFAR to create policy measures geared towards self-sufficiency instead of inclining towards importation of fish and aquatic products, which is clearly not a sustainable agenda. Number 2, for the BFAR, or the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, to aggressively undertake conservation, protection, and sustained management of our country's fishery and aquatic resources, and measures on poverty alleviation and provision of supplementary livelihood among more than 1.8 marginalized fisher folks. Number 3, to review the provisions of the law with regards to the importation of fish and aquatic products in local markets in order to ensure that there will not be any impetus or half-baked decisions that will affect the marginalized sector of the society in the long run. Number 4, to direct the DABFAR and concerned local government units not only to religiously implement existing laws, local ordinances, orders and regulations, but also to provide for monitoring mechanisms and be pioneers in information, education, communication plan, and advocacy. Mr. Speaker, as a developing nation, we continue to venture into the export industry, exporting our aquatic and marine resources as one of the major industries. Nevertheless, it does not mean that we should disregard taking a pragmatic view on our current situation. The ineffective implementation and management of sound laws and regulations cannot be overshadowed by the context of endorsing another policy into play in the guise of a remedy for the ineptitude of these concerned agencies. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to quote U.S. President Thomas Jefferson, and he says, "A good government is one which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread that it has earned." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Majority Leader.
Madam
The
Speaker.
Honorable Bello is recognized.
Yes, would the gentleman from the party list be open to a few questions?
Gladly, Honorable Bello.
Yes, dear colleague, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, are there identifiable private importing interests that are behind this effort to liberalize fish importation?
So now I have not really identified certain groups, no? But the move of DA, of Department of Agriculture, and the BFAR is already suspect to that direction, Honorable Bello. We see that there is a strong lobby for importation. And while we don't deny there's importation now, no? Certain aquatic resources, there is, I see an inclination to a wider, shall we say, move to have importation at a bigger scale.
And in terms of the crisis in the fishing grounds that the gentleman has spoken about, and we're talking about overfishing in these areas. You identified about 15 major fishing grounds. Madam Speaker, are we talking about overfishing by our subsistence fishermen mainly, or are this really mainly caused by the presence of foreign fleets? Because we have been one of those countries that have been identified as being subject to incursions by Taiwanese, Chinese, and other foreign Asian big trawling vessels. Is this, Madam Speaker, dear colleague, in fact brought about mainly by our inability to police our fishing grounds so as to reserve them for our local fishing industry?
Yes, the fishing grounds have been subjected to many intrusions, so, as we read in the papers and several reports where we have arrested so many poachers in our waters, no? And both in commercial fishing and in poachers, these have been not monitored quite well, and the VFAR has been quite at a loss on how to enforce our fishery laws. That's why this segment of commercial fishing, which is all about 5%, will affect so much on the marginalized farmers, no? Because about 1.750 million farmers would be affected by the acts of these commercial fishers, commercial companies that go into commercial fishing, including those illegal intrusions by foreign fish companies.
Yes, dear colleague, Madam Speaker, should we then be thinking maybe of stronger policing and beefing up the Coast Guard in terms of being able to protect these areas? Because we're now talking about not only economic problem, but of a security problem in terms of being able to protect, the interests. This is becoming sort of an economic security problem. What are your thoughts? What are the thoughts, Madam Speaker, of our dear colleague regarding the security issue with respect to the Coast Guard?
I think all concerned agencies would be reminded that they're tasked to implement our fishery laws. Even municipal laws have to be implemented. And for as long as we have a weak enforcement of the fishery laws, and Coast Guard, I think, is deputized to that, no? We will be subjected to more violations in the seas, no? And this is the justification which will allow the government to shift from its policy to importation. And remember, there was a news that even galonggong might be imported, no? And that would be detrimental to our fish farmers, our marginalized, who don't go to the high seas actually, but have this, do their fishing in the, shall we say, internal waters, no? And that is the fear that we are having out of the acts of big fish operators. The result will be against the local fish farmers, which are many and very poor. And in fact, they don't have to compete with the commercial fish companies because they're just in the municipal waters. But then the effect of it is that if there's importation, then we displace the livelihood of our fish farmers.
Finally, Madam Speaker, dear colleague, relating this to the previous speech by our colleague from General Santos, would you be in favor of the creation of, the Department of the Fisheries, and how would this bring about a resolution of this problem?
Yes, I fully agree with the Honorable Acharon. No? We have a similar objective, and it all boils down to how we can protect our local fish farmers by implementing laws for their benefit. And we are in accord with that pronouncement, and we hope that that department can have more powers to implement and to safeguard our coastline for the benefit of our fish farmers in the country.
With that, Madam Speaker, dear colleague, I would just like to congratulate the Representative Rodriguez as well as Representative Acharon for bringing to focus a really major and urgent problem in terms of the protection of our fisheries, and underlining the fact that the solution does not lie in liberalizing our fish imports, but really in terms of really protecting, supporting, subsidizing our fishing industry vis-a-vis the heavily subsidized and already very prosperous fishing industries of many of our ASEAN and Japanese and Chinese neighbors, and also for underlining the importance of beefing up the Coast Guard and other agencies that are really would really need to be beefed up in terms of protecting our economic security, the economic security of our fishing grounds. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, dear colleague.
Thank you, Honorable Bellew, and thank you also for emphasizing on the need for enforcement, and this can be brought about by a new Department of Fishery, which we fully support. Thank you very much.
Madam Speaker, I move that the speech of the Honorable Rodriguez as well as his interpellations be referred to the appropriate committee.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The speech of the Honorable Rodriguez and the interpellation is referred to the appropriate committee.
Nag-approve na journal? Hindi pa. Approve na.